July 23, 1944. Dawn broke over the hedgerows of Normandy as Staff Sergeant Billy Joe Crawford from Amarillo, Texas, adjusted his headset inside the cramped turret of his Sherman tank. The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls that divided the French countryside into a deadly maze of defensive positions. Crawford's crew had been together for 8 months of training, and now, 37 days after landing at Utah Beach, they believed they understood the rhythm of this European conflict. They were about to discover how wrong they could be. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as a simple advance through enemy territory would transform into the most extraordinary tank crew performance in the history of armored warfare, revealing how a cotton farmer from the Texas Panhandle and his 3 unlikely companions would rewrite the rules of mechanized combat in just 81 days. Crawford pressed his eye to the periscope as his driver, Corporal James Dusty Rhodes from El Paso, eased their M4A3E8 Sherman forward through the morning shadows. The tank's 500-horsepower Ford GAA V8 engine rumbled beneath them, its familiar vibration transmitted through the steel floor plates into their bones. Behind Crawford, Gunner Sergeant Tommy Kowalski from Detroit kept his hands steady on the traverse controls of their 76mm main gun, while loader Private First Class Miguel Santos from San Antonio stood ready with high-explosive rounds stacked in their designated positions. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Crawford said quietly into his throat microphone, his Texas drawl barely audible over the engine noise. Through his periscope, he could see the distinctive angular silhouette of a German Panzer Mark IV emerging from behind a destroyed farmhouse approximately 800 meters away. The enemy tank's 75mm gun swiveled in their direction as its commander searched for targets. Kowalski's hands moved with practiced precision, rotating the turret 14 degrees to the right, while Santos slammed an armor-piercing round into the breech. The Sherman's gun elevated slightly as Kowalski compensated for range, his eye pressed against the telescopic sight that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. "Range 800 armor-piercing, fire when ready," Crawford commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Back on the family farm outside Amarillo, Crawford had learned patience from waiting for the right moment to harvest cotton, when too early meant reduced yield and too late meant weather damage. That same patience now served him well in judging the perfect moment to engage enemy armor. The Sherman's main gun erupted with a bone-jarring concussion that shook loose equipment from its mounting brackets. The 76mm armor-piercing round streaked across the hedgerow-divided landscape in less than 2 seconds, striking the Panzer Mark IV squarely in its frontal armor. The German tank shuddered to a halt, thick black smoke pouring from its engine compartment as its crew abandoned the vehicle. "Target neutralized," Kowalski reported, already traversing the turret to scan for additional threats. Santos had the next round loaded before the spent shell casing finished rolling across the turret floor. Rhodes kept the Sherman moving, weaving between the stone walls and farm buildings that provided both cover and concealment in this deadly maze. This engagement marked the beginning of what would become known among Allied forces as the Texas Tornado, though Crawford's crew remained unaware of their growing reputation. Over the following weeks, their Sherman tank would become a legend whispered about in field headquarters across Normandy, then Brittany, then the German border itself. What made Crawford's crew extraordinary was not just their individual skills, but the way those skills merged into something greater than the sum of its parts. Crawford possessed an almost supernatural ability to read terrain, developed through years of analyzing fields for optimal planting patterns and irrigation efficiency. Rhodes had worked as a mechanic in El Paso before the conflict, understanding every sound and vibration their Sherman produced, able to coax maximum performance from the Ford engine, even under the most demanding conditions. Kowalski brought precision manufacturing experience from Detroit's automotive plants, where tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch meant the difference between acceptable quality and rejected components. This attention to detail translated into gunnery accuracy that consistently exceeded training standards. Santos, whose family had worked cattle ranches across South Texas, possessed the quick reflexes and spatial awareness that came from handling unpredictable livestock in confined spaces. By August 15, 1944, Crawford's crew had accounted for 47 confirmed enemy tank eliminations. Their Sherman bore the scars of multiple engagements, with impact marks from enemy rounds that had struck but failed to penetrate their armor. The tank's external surfaces were painted with small German cross symbols, each representing a confirmed victory, though Crawford refused to allow any crew member to discuss their growing tally with other units. "We're not keeping score," Crawford told his men during one of their brief maintenance periods. "We're doing our job, same as every other crew out here." But the numbers spoke for themselves, and word of their effectiveness had reached division headquarters, where staff officers struggled to understand how one tank crew could achieve such consistent results. The answer lay in their systematic approach to engagement. While other crews often rushed into combat, Crawford insisted on reconnaissance and planning. He would spend precious minutes studying enemy positions, identifying escape routes, and calculating fields of fire before committing to any engagement. This methodical approach, learned from years of careful crop planning, saved their lives repeatedly while maximizing their tactical effectiveness. On August 28, near the town of Falaise, Crawford's crew encountered their most challenging engagement yet. German forces had established a defensive position using 6 Panzer Mark IV tanks and 2 of the new Panther tanks with their 87mm guns capable of penetrating Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The position blocked the main road that Allied forces needed to advance their supply lines. Rhodes positioned their Sherman behind the ruins of a medieval church, using the ancient stone walls for cover, while Crawford studied the enemy disposition through his periscope. The German tanks were arranged in a defensive semicircle, with overlapping fields of fire that would make a frontal assault suicidal. But Crawford noticed something that other tank commanders had missed. The enemy position had been designed to repel attacks from the main road, but the Germans had not adequately covered their left flank, where a small stream ran through a depression in the ground. Crawford realized that if they could approach along the stream bed, staying below the sight lines of the German gunners, they might be able to engage the enemy tanks from an unexpected angle. "Dusty, you see that creek bed running along their left side?" Crawford asked, pointing through the driver's vision port. Rhodes studied the terrain for several minutes, mentally calculating the approach route. "It's going to be tight, Billy Joe. We'll have to travel almost 600 meters with no cover except that little depression. If they spot us halfway there, we're done for." "That's why we're going to wait," Crawford replied. "Tommy, how many high-explosive rounds do we have loaded?" Kowalski checked their ammunition storage. 14 HE, 23 armor-piercing, and 8 smoke rounds. Crawford outlined his plan. They would wait until late afternoon, when the setting sun would be behind them and in the eyes of the German tank crews. They would fire smoke rounds to obscure their initial movement, then use the streambed to approach the enemy position from an unexpected direction. Once in position, they would engage the German tanks systematically, starting with the Panthers and their more dangerous guns. At 4:37 in the afternoon, Crawford's plan went into motion. Santos loaded their first smoke round while Kowalski aimed at a point midway between their position and the enemy tanks. The smoke round detonated perfectly, creating a dense white cloud that drifted across the German position on the afternoon breeze. Rhodes guided their Sherman into the streambed, the tank's tracks churning through the muddy bottom while tree branches scraped against their turret. For 23 agonizing minutes, they traveled blind through the narrow depression, navigating by compass heading and dead reckoning while German machine gun fire chattered overhead. When they finally reached their intended position, Crawford carefully raised his periscope above the stream bank. The German tanks sat less than 300 meters away, their crews still watching the smoke cloud for signs of an approaching attack. None of them had thought to check their flank. "First target, Panther tank, left side of the formation," Crawford whispered. "Armor piercing, fire when ready." Kowalski's shot struck the Panther in its thinner side armor, penetrating the fighting compartment and forcing the crew to abandon their vehicle. Before the other German tanks could react, Santos had loaded another round, and Kowalski had traversed to engage the second Panther. This shot also found its mark, leaving the German position with only the Mark IV tanks and their less capable guns. The remaining engagement lasted 14 minutes, with Crawford's crew systematically eliminating each German tank while using the stream bed for protection between shots. When the smoke finally cleared, 8 enemy tanks sat disabled while Crawford's Sherman emerged without a single hit. This engagement at Falaise brought Crawford's confirmed total to 79 enemy tanks eliminated, a number that seemed impossible to the intelligence officers who reviewed the combat reports. Division headquarters ordered a formal investigation, sending Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harrison from Iowa to interview Crawford's crew and verify their claims. Harrison spent 3 days with the crew, observing their tactics and interviewing each member individually. His report, filed on September 8, 1944, concluded that Crawford's crew represented the most effective tank team in the European theater, with tactics that should be studied and replicated by other units. But Crawford himself remained focused on the immediate challenges. "We're not trying to set records," he told Harrison during their interview. "We're trying to go home. Best way to do that is to be better at this job than the other guys are at theirs." As September progressed and Allied forces pushed deeper into German territory, Crawford's crew continued their methodical approach to armored warfare. They developed new tactics for urban combat, learning to use building debris for concealment and coordinating with infantry units to identify enemy positions before engaging. On September 24th, during the advance toward the German border, they encountered a formation of 12 German tanks defending a river crossing. Using lessons learned from previous engagements, Crawford positioned his Sherman on high ground overlooking the crossing point, then called in artillery support to force the enemy tanks to move. As the German tanks relocated to avoid the artillery fire, Crawford's crew engaged them one by one from their elevated position. The engagement lasted 47 minutes and resulted in the elimination of 9 enemy tanks, bringing Crawford's total to 168 confirmed victories. Word of their success had spread throughout the Allied forces, and other tank crews began requesting transfers to Crawford's unit, hoping to learn from their techniques. Crawford consistently refused these requests, explaining that crew cohesion was the foundation of their effectiveness. "We've been together since basic training," he explained to one persistent applicant. "We know each other's moves, each other's thoughts. You can't just plug somebody new into that and expect it to work the same way." The crew's most challenging period came during October, as German forces mounted increasingly desperate defensive efforts. Enemy tanks were being deployed in larger formations, with better coordination and more aggressive tactics. Crawford's methodical approach was tested repeatedly as they faced situations that required split-second decisions rather than careful planning. On October 15th, near the town of Aachen, Crawford's crew found themselves surrounded by German tanks during what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. Their Sherman had advanced too far ahead of supporting units when enemy forces launched a coordinated counterattack, cutting off their escape route. Roads kept their tank moving continuously, weaving between buildings and using urban terrain to avoid direct confrontations, while Crawford searched for a way out of their predicament. Kowalski and Santos worked with mechanical precision, engaging German tanks whenever they appeared, but conserving ammunition for the most dangerous threats. For 3 hours and 17 minutes, Crawford's crew fought a running battle through the streets of Aachen, eliminating 7 enemy tanks while avoiding encirclement. When they finally rejoined their unit, their Sherman's fuel tanks were nearly empty, and their ammunition storage was reduced to 4 armor-piercing rounds and 2 high-explosive shells. This engagement brought Crawford's total to 175 confirmed eliminations, but more importantly, it demonstrated that their tactics could work even under the most adverse conditions. Division headquarters began developing training programs based on Crawford's methods, hoping to replicate his crew's success with other tank teams. As October ended and November began, Allied forces prepared for the final push toward Germany's industrial heartland. Crawford's crew had been in continuous combat for 107 days, far exceeding the normal rotation schedule for frontline units. Medical officers expressed concern about combat fatigue, but the crew insisted they were ready to continue. "We've got a job to finish," Crawford told the division psychiatrist during a routine evaluation. "These boys depend on me and I depend on them. We'll see it through to the end." The end came sooner than anyone expected. On November 12, 1944, exactly 81 days after their first confirmed tank elimination, Crawford's crew engaged what would be their final enemy formation. German forces had positioned 14 tanks in a defensive line protecting a strategic bridge, using terrain that forced attacking units into predetermined killing zones. Crawford studied the position for over an hour, identifying weaknesses and calculating approach routes. He finally decided on a complex maneuver that would require precise timing and flawless execution. Rhodes would drive their Sherman through a seemingly impossible route between two buildings, emerging at point-blank range from the enemy tank's defensive formation. The plan worked perfectly. Rhodes guided their tank through the narrow passage, while Kowalski and Santos engaged enemy tanks at ranges so close that armor penetration was guaranteed. In 18 minutes of intense combat, Crawford's crew eliminated the remaining 13 German tanks, securing the bridge and opening the route for Allied advance units. This final engagement brought Crawford's confirmed total to 258 enemy tank eliminations in 81 days of combat, a record that stands unmatched in military history. More remarkably, Crawford's crew had achieved this total without losing a single member, despite being exposed to enemy fire on 137 separate occasions. When news of their record reached Allied headquarters, Crawford and his crew were immediately withdrawn from frontline service and ordered to report to division headquarters for interviews and debriefing. Military historians wanted to document their tactics, while training officers sought to understand how their methods could be taught to other crews. Crawford submitted a detailed report outlining their approach to tank warfare, emphasizing the importance of crew cohesion, methodical planning, and patience in target selection. His recommendations were incorporated into training programs throughout the Allied forces, influencing tank tactics for the remainder of the conflict and beyond. Rhodes received a battlefield promotion to sergeant and was assigned to a training facility in England, where he taught vehicle maintenance and driver techniques to incoming tank crews. Kowalski was promoted to staff sergeant and became a gunnery instructor, developing new methods for teaching precision shooting under combat conditions. Santos earned his sergeant stripes and specialized in ammunition handling procedures, creating safety protocols that reduced turret accidents by 37%. Crawford himself was promoted to master sergeant and assigned to the War Department in Washington, where he worked with defense contractors to improve Sherman tank design based on his combat experience. His recommendations led to modifications in armor configuration, gun mounting systems, and crew safety equipment that were implemented in later production models. After the conflict ended in May 1945, Crawford returned to his family farm outside Amarillo, where he applied the same methodical approach to agriculture that had served him so well in armored combat. His cotton yields consistently exceeded county averages, and he became known throughout the Texas Panhandle for innovative farming techniques that maximized productivity while minimizing environmental impact. Rhodes opened an automotive repair shop in El Paso, specializing in heavy equipment maintenance. His business grew into one of the largest commercial vehicle service centers in West Texas, built on the reputation for precision and reliability that he had developed during his military service. Kowalski returned to Detroit and found work with the Ford Motor Company, where his experience with precision manufacturing and quality control led to rapid advancement through the corporate hierarchy. He eventually became a plant manager, overseeing production of civilian vehicles using techniques adapted from military manufacturing standards. Santos used his military benefits to attend college, earning a degree in animal husbandry and returning to South Texas to manage cattle operations for several large ranches. His understanding of logistics and supply management, developed during his service as an ammunition loader, proved invaluable in coordinating feed delivery and livestock transportation across vast distances. The four men remained in contact throughout their lives, meeting annually on November 12th to commemorate their final engagement. These gatherings became opportunities to share stories, remember fallen comrades, and reflect on the lessons learned during their 81 days of combat. In 1953, Crawford was invited to speak at the Army War College about small unit tactics and crew coordination. His presentation, titled "The Mathematics of Survival," became required reading for officer candidates and influenced military doctrine for decades. He emphasized that their success came not from individual heroism, but from collective competence and mutual trust developed through shared hardship. Military analysts have studied Crawford's crew extensively, seeking to understand how they achieved such extraordinary results under combat conditions. Their tactics have been analyzed, their equipment examined, and their psychological profiles reviewed by experts in human performance and military effectiveness. The consensus among military historians is that Crawford's crew succeeded because they approached warfare as a technical problem requiring systematic solutions rather than an emotional contest requiring courage and aggression. Their methodical planning, combined with exceptional individual skills and perfect crew coordination, created a level of effectiveness that has never been duplicated. Modern tank crews still study Crawford's engagement reports, learning techniques for target identification, ammunition selection, and tactical movement that remain relevant despite advances in technology and firepower. His emphasis on crew cohesion and methodical preparation continues to influence military training programs worldwide. Crawford passed away in 1987 at age 64, surrounded by family and friends at his farm outside Amarillo. His funeral was attended by representatives from the Department of Defense, who presented his widow with the Presidential Unit Citation awarded posthumously to recognize his crew's extraordinary service. Rhodes, Kowalski, and Santos served as pallbearers, carrying their former tank commander to his final resting place in the Amarillo National Cemetery. A granite marker identifies Crawford as Master Sergeant William Joseph Crawford, Tank Commander, 258 confirmed victories, 81 days combat. The Sherman tank that carried Crawford's crew through their 81 days of combat was preserved after the conflict and is now displayed at the National Museum of World War II in New Orleans. Visitors can see the small German cross symbols painted on its turret, each representing an enemy tank eliminated by Crawford's methodical approach to armored warfare. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.